Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be showing you why you're unable to land on buildings in Microsoft Flight Simulator. And by unable to land on buildings, I'm referring to most buildings. I'm not referring to all buildings. There are certainly some buildings you can safely land on. But what we'll do is we're going to go fly over to Hartford here, and we're just going to show you sort of some of the problem that you're probably going to face with it. Now, Microsoft Flight Simulator is a very, very sophisticated program. There's so much scenery going on, so many different buildings that are automatically generated. There's the photogrammetry, and one of the downsides of making anything that's a 3D game is you have the issue of collision boxes. Now, what they did in the previous versions of Flight Sim, for those of you who remember back for like FSX and earlier, is they actually made a massively simplified collision box for the purposes of detecting if you hit a tree, for example. What they would do is they basically, instead of a big spiky tree, is they had an invisible rectangle box. And if you bumped into the invisible rectangle box, you had considered to being collided into it, and you're no longer able to actually, continue your flight. It's considered a crash. You'd ricochet off it. You bounce kind of whatever damage setting that you have. Now, one of the things that's so tantalizing is I'm looking over my nose right here, and I've got, I guess it's Hartford, Connecticut. I wouldn't know because I'm missing some critical buildings that I kind of need to know it is Hartford, Connecticut here, but it's okay. And I see some really, really tantalizing structures for the purposes of plopping my little helicopter down. Now, this helicopter is basically perfect for the purposes of plopping. I find it just a little on the light side. Like, the light helicopters are great for training purposes. They're not great for, like, practical day-to-day. If it's windy, I don't want to get gusted off the side of a building purposes. So you kind of have a bit of both problems here. Now, landing on a building in the real world is challenging. The problem you're going to face, of course, is strong winds. You're going to get all sorts of weird vortexes coming off the side of a building as the wind interacts with the skyscrapers below. Flying into the tops of buildings was actually very, very common. They actually used to use military surplus helicopters in Manhattan for the purposes of, ferrying people back and forth from JFK, or a different airport that it was at the time. So the problem we have now is, we'll go ahead and show you. So not only do we have the winds, we have to deal with rotor and ground effect. Rotor and ground effect is simply an effect whereby when our rotor gets close to the ground, we get a reduction in drag, which causes us to have this very, very, very aggressive floating characteristic. And then, of course, we have to put all that together, deal with the turbulence caused by the wind, and the collision boxes, which I was mentioning a moment ago. So right off my 12 o'clock right here, I see myself a lovely building. That looks pretty good. I'll start slowing myself down here. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Again, as we start to slow down, there's no vertical speed indicator on this one. That kills me just a little bit here. Oh, let's go ahead and get ourselves nice and slow. It's going to be a lot of right foot. Whoa! A little bit too much right foot there. One of the downsides to not having a dedicated collective is the fact you're using a traditional throttle, which makes this challenging. So I'm looking at my window right now, and I see myself a perfectly nice place to land a helicopter. Like I said, nothing too crazy. It's not too bumpy. There's one little vent over there on the right. For all intents and purposes, that looks like a perfectly acceptable location to fly my helicopter. So what I will do is I will go ahead and do a nice slow approach down here. Generally, this is very dangerous. If we have an engine on at any time, we're going to be one with the side of that building, unfortunately. And we're just going to edge our way. So the first problem we'll face, in the real world, of course, other than the turbulence, which isn't too bad today, is the rotor and ground effect. So what would happen is, as I get close to the ground here, we'd start floating uncontrollably. So I'm going to go ahead and give it just a little bit of power here, and there's the rotor and ground effect. You'll see how the helicopter just kind of lifted up a couple feet. Now the next problem, and this is definitely a flight sim problem, is the fact this building looks nice and rectangular, but it actually isn't remotely rectangular. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce my collective here while holding myself a little bit sideways. That's okay. Whoa! What was that, do you ask? Did you push the rotors wrong? No. Watch this. So I'm down. I'm going to go ahead and level myself out here. And I explode. So you can see that our helicopter, even though everything was perfectly flat along the top, ricocheted off something initially, which was a little strange. And then moments later, even though it was rectangular, the collision box wasn't, which of course gave us a bit of a kersmoosh. So as you can see, even though we have the capability that we should be able to, if you have damage enabled, any of those slightly uneven collision boxes are going to result in quite the explosion. For shame. Enjoy.